I, Sandeep Datta, Faculty, Delhi School of Economics, extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the third Young Scholar Seminar. Before we proceed further, may I request everyone kindly to rise for the University Colgate.
जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम
श्रेष्ठ सुंदर दिव्य दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय विहंगम
जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम सकल वसुधा निज कुटुंब की भावना संस्कृति सनातन आधुनिक शिक्षा पुरातन ज्ञान धाराओं का संगम
देश की स्वाधीनता हित भूमिका शतकोटि वंदन
निष्ठा धृति सत्यम के मंगल दिव्य भावों का समागम
जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का आलोक अनुपम
भव्य महाविद्यालयों के परिसरों से चिर सुशोभित श्रेष्ठ गुरुजन कर रहे नित्य छात्र और छात्राएं दीक्षित
सदचरित्राचार पावन साधना संकल्प संयम
नवल वैश्विक चेतना नव क्रांति संस्कारों का उद्गम जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम
श्रेष्ठ सुंदर दिव्य दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय विहंगम
जयति जय जय जयति जय जय ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम
ज्ञान का आलोक अनुपम
ज्ञान का लोक अनुपम
ज्ञान का आलोक अनुपम
Thank you. Please be seated. It's my privilege to welcome our distinguished dignitaries to the dais. I request Professor Ram Singh, Director, Delhi School of Economics and Chair of Young Scholars Seminar 2026, Professor Ananya Ghosh Dastidar, who will deliver the inaugural lecture, and Professor Surender Kumar, the chair of this session, to kindly take their places on the stage. Thank you. It's a privilege to welcome such a distinguished gathering of young scholars, faculty members, and practitioners from the leading institutions across the country. This seminar reflects the enduring academic spirits of Delhi School of Economics, characterized by rigorous inquiry, open exchange of ideas, and commitment to advancing knowledge that is both analytically rigorous and policy relevant. This year's seminar is especially significant as it is being organized under the aegis of Ministry of MSMEs, Government of India. We initiated the Young Scholar Seminar in 2024 to create a platform for emerging researchers, and it has become an important part of our academic calendar since then. The response this year has been extremely encouraging. I'm pleased to announce that we have received around 300 high-quality submissions across the country. Given the highly competitive selection process, we selected only 39 papers for the presentations from different IITs, IIMs, MSCs, state and central universities, and research organizations. I extend my sincere congratulations and warm welcome to all the presenters of YSS 2026. Over the next 3 days, we will have the opportunity to engage with a wide range of research covering important areas in economics. We are also deeply honored to have with us the eminent speaker, including Professor Dastidar, Professor Dilip Mukherjee, Dr. Saji VK, Chairman of NABARD, and Professor Narayan Murthy, who will share their insights through lectures and discussions. Their presence provides an invaluable opportunity to connect academic research with broader policy and institutional perspective. The Young Scholar Seminar provides an important forum for presenting new research, receiving constructive feedback, and fostering meaningful academic exchange. I hope all participants will find the seminar intellectually enriching, productive, and engaging. And I encourage everyone to actively participate in the discussion. With these words, I once again extend my warm welcome to all of you and wish Third Young Scholar Seminar a great success. Now I request Professor Ram Singh to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Professor Ananya Ghosh Dastidar, my colleague Professor Surender Kumar, colleagues from Delhi School of Economics and University of Delhi, dear conference participants and students, I welcome you all. I will join my colleague Dr. Sandeep Datta to say a few more words by way of welcoming you and also adding some perspectives to this event. As the name suggests that this is the third DSC YSS. It's a seminar of a different kind. It's a conference. This conference is motivated by our sense of responsibility towards scholars and students throughout India. As a leading institution in economics research, we consider it as our duty to handhold, to mentor, to facilitate research in different parts of the country. At Delhi School, we organize series of events. As a result, our students, faculty, and also faculty and students on campus colleges benefit. But we have been wanting to go beyond in terms of providing our service using Delhi School of Economics as a platform for research presentations, deliberations, for fostering collaborations between young researchers from different institutions in India with leading institutions in India, including Delhi School of Economics. So we started this process 3 years ago. Therefore, this is the third edition. We have been extremely impressed by the response in terms of quantity and also quality. On one hand, we want to serve as many young scholars as we can, but we want to do so without compromising on quality. Therefore, the selection process has been very rigorous. So the selection rate has been around 12 or 13% only. So that gives you a sense of the competition that you have passed through. And that also is a compliment to the research that you have done, you will be presenting here. In this event, you will get opportunity to interact with colleagues from Delhi School of Economics, also from leading institutions from rest of the world. Professor Dilip Mukherjee, for instance, from Boston University, will spend here quite some time. He is giving a talk and he will also be available over lunch for you to interact with. We have a policy dimension also to this event. NABARD chairmen, they are integral part of agriculture and rural development credits and all the interventions that are there. So we have brought eminent policy makers also to the process. We also use this opportunity to bring non-economists, but who are stalwarts in their field. So economics, we should look at not only we surely should pay attention to remain focused on rural development, agriculture, but we also have to think of agriculture in a larger context, Indian economy in a larger context, including private sector. So this year we are happy that Sri Narayan Murthy will also be coming here, and he is speaking on an economic topic. So that will be an opportunity for us to learn from him and also give him a thing or two, an idea, one or two, so that he goes back reflecting about his interaction here. We will have colleagues colleagues from other institutions who will serve as session chairs, discussants. All this, in all, you will have opportunity to interact with at least 60 people researchers who have made their names in their respective fields in economics. So it's a great opportunity for you to make use of. We sincerely hope you will use this opportunity to explore possibility of research collaborations with DSC faculty, with one another, and colleagues who will be coming, senior scholars who will be coming as a session chairs, as a discussants, and also plenary speakers like Professor Ananya Ghosh Dastidar. With these words, I welcome you again, and we can look forward to 3 very exciting days. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Singh. Now, it's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Professor Ananya Ghosh Dastidar. Professor Ananya Ghosh Dastidar is the professor and head of Department of Finance and Business Economics at University of Delhi. She has been associated with University of Delhi over 2 decades and has played an important role in teaching, research, and academic leadership within the Department of Business of Economics. She obtained her PhD in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Dastidar has authored and edited several scholarly publications, including the edited volume Economic Theory and Policy Amidst Global Discontent, and contributed extensively to research on development strategies, inequality, and international trade. Her work has appeared in academic journals and edited volumes, and she has supervised and mentored numerous postgraduate and doctoral students. Through her academic contributions, teaching, and leadership, Professor Dastidar has made significant contribution to economic research and higher education in India, particularly in the areas of development and international economics. Now, it's also my privilege to introduce Professor Surender Kumar, who is the faculty and professor of economics at Delhi School of Economics, University of Delhi, and also the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences. He is an environmental economist with extensive experience in teaching, research, and policy-oriented work across environmental and resource economics, climate change economics, energy economics, and applied econometrics. He has obtained his PhD and MPhil in economics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, specializing in environmental economics. Professor Kumar's research focuses on environmental sustainability, climate change, energy use, productivity analysis, and public policy. He has published extensively in the leading academic journals such as Ecological Economics, Energy Economics, and so on, and has authored and co-authored several books on environmental and sustainable development in economics. Now, I request Professor Kumar to carry the session further. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. So, I'm very happy to welcome my former colleague and friend Ananya. And this year, this Young Scholar Seminar, this is on a particular theme. This MSME Ministries under AGIS that we are doing. And given this current scenario, one, at present we are observing these aspirations, whose aspirations are there. On the other side, there are these whose turbulences that's also happening. And given that the questions becomes, two important questions are on economic efficiency and competitiveness. That's the one. Second, what we also observe that in the country, of course at the macro level we are growing very fast. But most of this growth is concentrated in very few pockets. If at district level we try to see, you can say that around 50% of the GDP comes from the 15 districts or so. Very small belt that's giving us. And third, given this huge country, we have large, you can say, very large MSMEs, and in these MSMEs, most of them are micro, and most of them are working at the survival level. Stagnant and survival, that kind of situation you may observe. So given that, the different questions, in that the role of financial development, it becomes very crucial. So in this session, we will learn about this financial development in the country and why this financial repression remains an obstacle in that, and what could be the way forward. That also we are trying to learn from our own experience. With these opening remarks, I invite Ananya to deliver this inaugural address. Ananya, floor is yours. Thank you.
A very good morning to everyone present here today. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, especially the director, Delhi School of Economics, and the faculty, the organizing team. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. For me, it's an absolute privilege to be addressing this gathering at the Delhi School of Economics, which as a student I once aspired to study in. Well, couldn't make it, unfortunately. But the day I came here from Calcutta for my Delhi School exam, I still remember that day very clearly. And it's such a privilege to be addressing the students here on this wonderful occasion. I would just like to take this opportunity to congratulate the organizers for having this Young Scholars Conference. I think the youth the youth rock. Okay, that's where the future lies. Their aspirations will take the country places. And what better than to provide a platform for them to ideate, to have feedback on their valuable research, to give them a platform where they can interact with each other, and really this opportunity that you get to come to one of the best places in the country and present your paper, get feedback. I congratulate all of you who have made it to this seminar, and I do hope that you're going to have a wonderful experience. I'm sure you're going to have a wonderful experience. So with that, let me just begin talking about what I plan to. Um, so I'll just take you through so as you can see, the title of my talk is about lessons from India's twin balance sheet crisis, which is no longer a crisis actually. In fact, the finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman is on record saying that the twin balance sheet problem, as it used to be called, is now the twin balance sheet advantage. So of course, why are we talking about it? I think it has some very, very important lessons for us as we look at a world that's dominated by finance. So much so that my department, which was once known as the Department of Business Economics, is now called the Department of Finance and Business Economics. That's just part of the kind of muscle that finance flexes around. So without much ado, I'll just step into it. This is the plan of my lecture. I hope the slides are visible. Yeah, okay. So we'll just talk about the contours of financial development and some of the characteristics of finance at a global level. And then we'll talk about balance sheet problems. What I mean by balance sheet problems in general, before coming specifically to twin balance sheet problems. And therein, we will situate India's specific crisis with twin balance sheets, give you an outline of what this problem was all about, and where we stand now before we discuss some of the lessons that come out of it. So to talk about the contours of financial development, I think what the world has come to see today is the dominance of finance. Now, this did not happen in a day. This is actually a gradual process. So very briefly, by contours, I mean to outline this gradual rise and dominance of finance at the global level. So it really unfolded in the 1990s with two very specific events. One was the collapse of Soviet Russia, and the other was the fall of the Berlin Wall, which kind of declared the ultimate triumph of capitalism over any other alternate system. And alongside in the 1990s, we saw the spread of globalization. Country after country swept away tariff walls and went in for greater integration of domestic economies with the world economy. So you had not just financial development occur at a very fast pace within countries, but you also had capital flows connect countries across the globe in a way that had not been seen before. So along with globalization, there was also massive deregulation, which included financial liberalization. So all of this, I mean, I'm putting it as a single point, but believe you me, this unfolded over time, and the 1990s really was the heyday of all these changes. All of these have put in place the rising dominance of finance, where of course technology has played a role. The internet, the digitalization that we see now kind of change things around us, so much so that the New York Stock Exchange is now apparently going to be open 24/7. That's on the cards, right? So that, of course, was also part of the story. Now, what did we see with this dominance of finance? We saw essentially two things, if I may say so. One was financial innovation, and the other was financial liberalization, which I've put in here as deregulation. So among the complex financial instruments that emerged due to financial deregulation, primary among those is possibly the process of securitization. For those of you who are not entirely familiar with it, what securitization does is it allows financial entities to offload their assets and create new ones. So if you like, banks can loans are assets. Loans that banks give out are assets for the banks, right? So by securitization, they can actually take a whole bunch of loans and create a new security, right? And thereby the loan gets off the book of the bank and into the books of a special purpose vehicle, right, which the bank creates, which is now the owner of the security, the seller of that security. So it helps banks repackage assets and get it off their books. Okay, so that's just a very, very simple example of what became a very complex process of securitization, right? So financial innovation was one pillar of what enabled or what accompanied the dominance of finance, and the other was deregulation. Now, I don't know if you've heard about it before, but there's a very, very famous act, a very, very famous regulation in the USA, which is known as the Glass-Steagall Act. So the Glass-Steagall Act actually came in the 1930s. Now, what do you associate the 1930s with? The Great Depression, right? So the Great Depression, which was, one of the triggers was the stock market crash, the 1929 Wall Street collapse, right? So it brought about some extreme measures. It put in place some safeguards, and the Glass-Steagall Act was one of those. In essence, what it did was it separated retail banking, deposit-taking banking, from investment banking as a safeguard for retail deposit-based banking. So banks are the main financial intermediaries, right? They raise finance from from those who deposit money, and they create assets. Those are the liabilities of the banks, and banks go on to create assets on the basis of that, right? So whereas investment bankers have a much broader spread of area from which they raise funds and then lend it out. So investment banking and retail banking are the two arms, if you like, of banking. And the Glass-Steagall Act put a barrier between the two. Now, this is what was pulled down in 1999. So that really was a massive step, which later, when the discussion of the global financial crisis and the underpinnings and how did it all happen, when that question was asked, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act was seen as one of the main players out there. So this is something that accompanied the rising dominance of finance. And what we have seen afterwards is a recurrence of crisis, all kinds of economic crisis. Now, economic crises are of many varieties. You can have currency crisis, you can have sovereign debt crisis, you can have stock market crisis, right? You can have an external crisis. India had a balance of payments crisis in 1991. Now, what has been observed with the rising dominance of finance is the frequency of economic crises which are rooted in the financial sector. That has taken a leap. Okay, so the global financial crisis is, of course, a case in point. So that's what I had in mind so far as introducing you to the contours of financial development is concerned. Now, there are certain characteristics of the financial sector which have to be understood. And when we appreciate why is it that so many crises are associated with the financial sector itself. So one is the very, very easy reversibility of financial transactions and the very, very high volumes. Now with technology, it's something that happens not just in a matter of seconds, but in a matter of nanoseconds. That's how fast transactions, unlike real transactions are still things that take time, but financial transactions happen in split seconds and extremely high volumes. You have a high degree of uncertainty, and behavior in financial markets is marked by irrationality. If you think about it, when you have a stock that is tumbling, you'll have people as willing to buy as they are to sell. So certain decisions appear irrational. There is herd behavior, and there is contagion. So contagion, not just among buyers. I mean, I do something because the next person does it. I mean, that's herd behavior as well as contagion, but contagion across international borders. Something happens in Singapore, spreads to Dubai, Tokyo, and hits the Sensex in a matter of minutes. What drives these transactions are something as airy-fairy as expectations. Okay, expectations are not things you can touch and feel, but they are the drivers. Expectations of capital gains are drivers of financial markets. So what we are really trying to understand here is what are some of these characteristics which root crisis within the financial sector. And finally, you have very quick spread of instability or disturbances over time and space and across international boundaries. Okay, so all of this, along with the rising dominance of finance, have seen a lot of instability also associated with it. Now, balance sheet problems are actually a very important conduit for real financial sector interactions. So what we are trying to understand is why should, in appreciating the role of finance, should one be talking about balance sheet problems at all? All right, so they are one way in which financial trouble can actually spread and not just remain contained within the financial sector, but spill over into the real sector. So, as they say, when you sing, you begin with do, re, mi. When you read, you begin with A, B, C. So when you talk about balance sheet problems, you should first ask, what are balance sheets? Okay. So a balance sheet is a report on the financial structure and condition of a company, providing a realistic assessment of the value of the company's assets and liabilities at the time of publication. Now, I've taken this quote from this very accessible and thin volume. I think that those are two things one always likes to, associates with something one likes to read. A thin book and language one understands. So by those two criteria, this book by Goddard and Wilson is something that I'm really going to recommend to all young people. Okay, it's part of the OUP's short introduction. Okay, it's a short introduction to banking. So it's really a beautiful book. So that's how they define a balance sheet, and this is the normal standard accepted definition. Now, that being so, what are balance sheet problems? Now, balance sheet problems in general can be categorized as having, the garden variety of balance sheet problems are or can be of the following type. Now, think of an open economy where firms raise money not just from within the domestic economy but also from abroad, right? Now, in this case, if the domestic currency depreciates, then balance sheets of firms that have borrowed abroad are in trouble, right? Now, with emerging market economies like India, all right, repayment of loans that have been raised in dollars is also to be made in the foreign currency, okay? So if in the meantime the rupee has depreciated against the dollar, it means the 100 rupees that you borrowed is now close to 500 rupees without anything else having happened. Okay, so it puts a pinch on the balance sheet. So that's one example of a balance sheet problem. Now, another example would be sovereign debt, government debt, right? Now, on which side of the bank's balance sheets do government debts occur? The asset or the liabilities? The asset side or the liability side? The asset side, right? So when banks hold government debt, when banks hold government bonds, it's an asset for them, right? So when sovereign debt is downgraded, okay, it affects the balance sheet of banks, okay? So these are just two examples of when you can have balance sheet problems. Now, we of course are talking about twin balance sheet problems. So let's move from balance sheet problems to understand the interconnections between balance sheets of two parties or two entities. Now, twin balance sheet problems, or the TBS, as I'm going to call it from now on, could relate to the intertwined balance sheets of firms and banks. Now, how does this happen? As you know, firms undertake investment, which are typically lumpy, they cost a lot, and firms need to borrow for this. Now, who they borrow from, in a country like India, where, as you know, the debt market is still rather underdeveloped. Okay, we have a booming stock market, but when it comes to the bond market, particularly the market for corporate bonds, okay, one of the primary go-to places for firms, especially firms in the MSME sector, is still the banking system, right? So that puts a connection between firms and banks. And where do the loans that banks give to firms, where do those loans show up? Asset or liabilities? Asset side, right? So when firms have difficulty servicing debt, banks' balance sheets, banks' assets are adversely affected. So what happens is, whenever there is a negative shock, okay, to the real sector. Now, the negative shock could be Mr. Trump's tariffs, for instance, okay. Whenever there is a negative shock to the real sector and firms find it difficult to service their debt, it means rising non-performing assets, it means deterioration in banks' asset quality, it impairs their capital base, and it basically affects their ability to create credit. So in a very, very extreme situation, what that affects is something you must have read as an undergraduate student. It affects the money multiplier, right? And we know what happens when the money multiplier gets affected. It affects the supply of money. So this can actually act like a contractionary money supply, okay? A contractionary monetary policy. Right. So this is one kind of a twin balance sheet problem, which comes out of the interconnections between the balance sheet of firms and banks. Now, you can have interconnections between the balance sheet of banks and the sovereign. The sovereign is basically the government. And this has been called the diabolical loop, okay, because this is really quite serious. Now, if there is a sovereign debt crisis, now sovereign debt crisis is something that arises when nations are unable to repay their debt. There have been so many, but very close home, we saw what happened to Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, right? That's what institutions like the IMF and is for in particular. And now the European the EU has actually built a sort of a firewall system where any country within the EU that faces a sort of debt crisis, immediately they have a go-to a go-to financial support, so that there is no major financial disruption. So if there is a sovereign debt crisis, then obviously sovereign debt, government bonds get downgraded, and that affects credit creation, because it's banks' assets that back up their liabilities and enables the creation of further credit. Now, what is the situation like in India? How many of you are familiar with the term SLR? Yeah, statutory liquidity ratio. So by mandate, 18% of banks' deposits are mandated to be held in the form of government securities. And estimates suggest that public sector banks hold as much as 35% of total deposits as liquid assets. Now, the most liquid of all assets are government bonds. And a staggering 40% of government securities maturing in 2061 are actually held by banks. Okay, so that just gives you a sense of how dependent banks' balance sheets are on sovereign debt. So this could be one twin balance sheet problem, where the government's balance sheet, the government debt going awry, is something that affects banks. But this, as you know, is a diabolical loop. Banks in trouble can also mean governments in trouble. How does that work? Now, you see, governments are very, very keen not to let banks fail. What's one of the reasons for this? Banks actually play a key role, again, in something that you have studied in basic undergrad macro texts, the equality between savings and investments, right? Now, the funds for investments, which are partly, which are coming out of the savings, domestic savings in a closed economy, foreign savings in an open economy, right? That's channelized into investments through financial intermediation, and that's where banks lie, okay, at that critical point. And we know the importance of investments, right? If you talk about the basic neoclassical growth model, the Solo model, even the endogenous growth models, I mean, investments are the key drivers of growth, right? And physical investments foster innovation. It fosters creation of ideas, etc. So, of course, human capital formation is very important, but physical investments are also, they hold the key to growth, right? So this particular channel, so that it does not get disrupted, is something that governments are extremely careful to ensure. So as a result, they would not like banks to fail. And we saw that during the global financial crisis. After Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail, it's now said to be one of the biggest mistakes to have allowed the Lehman Brothers to fail, right? None of the other financial sort of giants were allowed to go down. Rather, central banks took on toxic assets onto their balance sheets, okay? So governments are very, very careful about not letting banks fail, and of course banks know it. So that creates a problem. I mean, that's a different problem altogether. But banking crises typically lead to bailouts. They lead to widening fiscal deficits and associated downgrading of sovereign debt. So there you go. That's the diabolical loop at work. So this is another type of twin balance sheet problem. Okay. So now what we are going to talk about is, of course, first highlight that this is a classic example of the complex interactions between the real and financial sectors which underlie macroeconomic processes. And we can, just as an example of a twin balance sheet problem, a GDP growth slowdown via firms' balance sheets. So their firms are unable to sell, therefore they are unable to service debt. Banks' balance sheets go down, which affects the money multiplier and therefore the supply of money. So that's how twin balance sheet problems can actually work. Okay. So let's now come to, so having spoken about financial, the path to financial development in general, the nature of the financial sector and how it can actually produce a crisis or two as it goes along. Having talked about balance sheets and balance sheet problems and twin balance sheet problems, now let's come to specifically India's twin balance sheet problem. So I'll just give you an outline of what occurred. First of all, it was a very quiet crisis, right? There was no collapse of the growth rate. If anything, the growth rate was something that was not affected at all, because India was actually clocking 7 and 8% with this twin balance sheet story unfolding. So that way, it's a very quiet crisis, which affected the balance sheet of firms, especially firms in the infrastructure sector. So very large firms and firms that typically have to borrow. Okay, so infrastructure firms cannot create investments out of their own funds because the scale of the investments is so very large. And particularly public sector banks were the ones to be affected. Now, this came to the fore with the RBI's asset quality review exactly 10 years ago in February 2016. So the RBI ordered an asset quality review, and it's a sort of an audit where banks have to declare and not dress up their NPAs. Okay, that's when this matter came to the fore, that the situation was this bad. And how bad was it? Well, there's this diagram which I really like, which I've taken from the economic survey of 2016-17. By the way, this economic survey has a beautiful chapter on the twin balance sheet crisis, which I would highly recommend you read if you are interested in this issue. So you have a red bar and a blue bar. So the red bar shows the market capitalization, that's the stock market value of all 24 public sector banks. And the blue bar is the market capitalization of a medium size, now of course one of the largest private sector banks, which is HDFC. So you can see in February 2015, the red bar was much taller than the blue bar, which is what's expected. It's 24 versus 1, 24 public sector banks versus 1 medium private sector bank. But look at how the story changed after the publication of the results of the asset quality review, the RBI's AQR. Okay, you have the valuation of 24 public sector banks less than a single private sector entity, which is HDFC. Right? So I really think this brings out the scale of the problem very, very succinctly. So what happened? Why did it happen? Now, again, if you have read this EPW piece on India's Dream Run, I mean, that's where I borrowed the title from. So India's dream run was this spell of export-oriented growth that India experienced in the mid-2000s, from about 2003-04 to 2007-08. So, I mean, this is the much talked about spell, which, we were clocking about 8 to 9% growth rate per annum, right? Which had simultaneous occurrence of a very high GDP growth and very high growth rates of export. And there was a private investment boom, particularly in infrastructure, and understandably, there was a credit boom. So all of this was happening together, and it all came together to produce India's dream run. Okay. Now, of course, things changed after that what happened in 2008-9? It was the global financial crisis, right? So this was just prior. And this is when the lending took place. So the credit boom is where all of the lending that later showed up as NPAs took place. And I just have a few diagrams which helps you see this. So the orange line is domestic credit to private sector, and the blue line is gross fixed capital formation as percentage of GDP. The source is World Development Indicators. I've just plotted this, okay, just to sort of show you the scale of the takeoff, okay. So you have one of the primary drivers of growth in East Asia, right? You've heard about the East Asian miracle, right? The East Asian miracle is the story of the East Asian tigers, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and later, of course, Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. So one of the drivers of that East Asian miracle was private investments. So share of private investments as in GDP really clocked upwards of 30%, 35%. And in India also, you can see, so what I have here is share of public sector and private sector in total investments. So the two lines really drifted apart with a sharp spike around 2004, 5, 6 in India. It really seemed like private investments have come of age. Okay. So that was a circle for there. So what I've done here is just to show you the difference in the growth rates. I've just plotted log of public investments and private investments over time. And again, the little circle highlights the change in slope. So the breakaway growth rate that private investments witnessed. So that's where the twin balance sheet problem had its genesis. But by 12-13, there were several problems that had led to growth slowdown. So, now it's also a story of a transition. It's also the story of a political transition. So the growth spurt was really UPA 1, and their return to power in its wake, and the growth slowdown led to emergence of the new government from 2014, the NDA-led government from 2014 onwards. So the growth slowdown by 2012-13 was driven by several factors. Of course, chief among them, the global financial crisis, which led to financial meltdown, debt crisis in advanced economies, fall in export demand. And this was dealt with by fiscal expansion. So China, India, Brazil, large economies had fiscal expansion to combat this growth slowdown. And initially there was talk of decoupling. It seemed that these economies would not be affected by what was happening in the West, right? Except it didn't stay that way. Governments hit fiscal constraint, and the expansionary impulse had to be limited. Now, the growth slowdown had negative effects on firms' cash flows, profit growth, and the quality of their balance sheets. And remember, the firms we are talking about especially are the infrastructure firms, who had taken advantage of extremely low interest rates. So the run-up to the global financial crisis had extremely low global interest rates. And they had taken advantage of that actually to also raise money, not just domestically, but also abroad. And if you remember, the transition from UPA to the NDA-led coalition was actually marked by what was known as policy paralysis. Environmental clearances were not given, they were delayed, there were court cases, and basically projects, the CMIE has a database on stalled projects. So the stalled projects was actually something that grew, and the infrastructure sector was particularly affected. So firms' balance sheets got affected, and the story unfolded. Firms have difficulty servicing debt. Now here you have a very handy measure of firms' ability to service debt. It's called the interest coverage ratio. Now, the interest coverage ratio is basically earnings before interest and taxes upon interest payments. Okay, and so basically earnings to interest payments, and a healthy ratio, of course, has to be over 1. So if it's less than 1, it's basically telling you that here's a firm that's likely to default on its debt. So by 2017, more than 40% of corporate debt that was monitored by Credit Suisse was owed by firms with interest coverage ratio less than 1. Now, mind you, these had not defaulted. Okay, these firms were the ones which were likely to default. So it just shows you what the picture was like. You had firms defaulting, and on top of that, 40% was held by extremely vulnerable or fragile firms. So, that's how India's story unfolded. As firms' balance sheet worsened, banks' balance sheets got adversely affected. In addition, India had the problem of what the erstwhile RBI governor, I think he's the one we associate this term willful defaulters with, flagged. Okay, you had the Mehul Choksis and the Gitanjali gems. So if you look at this piece, which I've picked up from the Live Mint, there were upwards of 2,500 companies who were willful defaulters, and Gitanjali gem tops this list. Okay, and they have collectively failed to repay an amount of close to 2 lakh crores, despite having the capacity to do so. Okay, just gives you an idea of the extent of the hit that banks' balance sheet took. So, rising non-performing assets. Now, this is what was uncovered by RBI's asset quality review. Rising non-performing assets led to deterioration, especially in the balance sheets of public sector banks. Now, here's another graphic which I've borrowed from the Economic Survey of 2016-2017, just to give you a scale of the problem. So, NPA ratios as percentage of gross loans, India's ratio stood at 9%. Now, I don't know if you've heard about something called the East Asian crisis. The East Asian crisis is something that hit East Asia, particularly Thailand, and then it spread. It spread across Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, and even Japan was not unaffected. So during the East Asian crisis, which particularly hit Korea bad, right? Its banking NPAs were 8.9%. India's NPAs, public sector banks' NPAs, was actually more than that. So it just puts the problem in perspective. Just some other graphics to draw your attention to the scale of the problem. You can see how once the asset quality review came in February 2016, in 2015-16, the story just started unfolding, and the NPAs peaked in 2017-18. Now, you can see the peak in, this is India's gross NPA ratio. You can see how, as percentage of gross advances and percentage of total assets. And you can see how things have improved, right? As we move to the current scenario. So the gross NPA of public sector banks declined from about 15% to 3% and further to 2.5% in September 25. And in September last year, the overall NPAs of the banking sector at 2% is the healthiest it's been in 15 years. Okay, so that's how much things have changed. So, cut to today, right? What is the situation like? As I said, according to our finance minister, it's the twin balance sheet advantage, right? So banks' balance sheets have hardly been healthier, with gross NPAs of SCBs standing at 2%. And what is it that has worked? So apart from strict supervision by the RBI, the policies that have helped include the institution of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which came in 2016, and massive recapitalization of banks. Okay, so a 3.3 lakh crore of capital infusion in public sector banks between 2017-18 and 21-22. And as of March 25, over 30,000 cases involving defaults amounting to about 14 lakh crores were resolved at the pre-admission stage under the IBC. So these have definitely been game changers in terms of the policy response in turning things around. So what is the situation so far as banks' lending profile is concerned? Well, banks' exposure to large corporate loans saw very limited growth between 18-19 and 24-25. Rather, loans to non-bank financial corporations, NBFCs, and to consumers, both secured and unsecured lending. So unsecured lending to consumers would be things like credit card loans, right? So those are what have been growing at a fast pace. So all I'm trying to sort of outline here is that we've crossed the hill so far as one problem is concerned, but there may be other problems turning the corner, right? So, by the way, approximately 70% of bank credit to industry goes to large industries and about 30% goes to MSMEs. So if you look at growth in sectoral credit, right, if you compare 17-18 from 2007 to 2017, about a 10-year span, to 18-19 to 24-25, you can see that lending to large industries has really come down. The rate of growth of lending to large industries has fallen from about 14% to 2%. So what you're seeing is this earlier lending to infrastructure, which is very large loans, right, and a lot of it, right, and something that seems to have changed massively from there. And where's the story? So there is an MSME story here, okay. It's almost increased by 10 percentage point, the growth rate of lending to MSMEs, and unsecured credit has also picked up pace, unsecured consumer credit, apart from secured consumer credit. Now, something happened in the NBFC sector in 2018. Do you remember what it was? There was something called an ILFS crisis, okay? So the non-banking financial sector, there was a massive player called ILFS, and they declared bankruptcy. So that's what marks the turnaround in NBFC lending from about 20% to about 14%. The NBFCs, by the way, are a very, very crucial player so far as the MSME sector is concerned. It's much easier for the MSMEs to borrow from NBFCs rather than from large commercial banks, and also consumer credit. So all your gold loan, etc., is part of the NBFC sector. And if you look at the share of MSMEs versus large industries, so large industries, the tapering off is actually something that's has a mirror image in the growth of NBFCs in total bank credit to industry. So the kind of exposure, pre-twin balance sheet crisis, it was big infrastructure firms. Post, it is unsecured consumer loans, it is NBFCs, it is MSMEs. That's where the story lies. Okay, so these are some of the sectors to watch out for. These are some of the balance sheets to watch out for. So among other things, the pattern of credit growth mirrors the slowdown in large corporate private investments that India has been experiencing in the post-global financial crisis period. It was just a 3% growth in investments in machineries compared to about 8% for investments in housing by private non-financial corporations, which mirrors this changing loan structure. And of course, it's a positive response to the slew of measures that the government has adopted to ease credit flows to MSMEs. Right. So, well, we're almost done. What are the lessons? One of the lessons is something that was flagged around 2000, around 2013-14 in a very nice book called This Time is Different. Okay, it's a book by Reinhardt and Rogoff, which did a study on different kind of crises, and what they show is you can have debt crisis, you can have stock market crisis, you can have banking crisis. If you rank them, and on a scale of how deadly these are, the deadliest are the banking crisis. Okay, the hardest to emerge out of, right? So every country, so they analyze a lot of data, and they show that every country that has had a banking crisis has emerged out of it for a period almost as long as 9 to 10 years. So that's something, our private investments still haven't really taken off. And this may have played a role, because even though it was quiet, a banking crisis, it definitely was. It underscores the complexities of real financial interactions. So you actually have a talk of a 4 balance sheet problem. Now, what are the 4 balance sheet problem? You have banks and infrastructure firms getting linked with each other, and you have real estate companies and NBFCs. So NBFCs lent a great deal to the real estate companies. And when there was a downturn in real estate demand after the global financial crisis, after demonetization, and the entire digitalization move, which made the entire economy far more transparent, right? So a lot of the quote unquote black money based real estate transactions took a knock. The entire real estate sector, I mean, that was, of course, just part of the reason. The global financial crisis had a lot to do with it. So the real estate downturn was something that hit the NBFCs really hard, because their balance sheets started going awry. Okay, and ILFS, the collapse of ILFS was part of the story. So you have to watch out for these balance sheet effects. And I think the main pointer that, or the main lesson that I have as a teacher of economics for all of you as students of economics is that we need to look into these balance sheet effects while we carry out macroeconomic analysis. Even if it's aggregate analysis, I think as economists, we have to get our hands dirty and look into balance sheets. And there is inadequate emphasis on this, I feel, in macroeconomic texts. So I think as teachers particularly, we have a role to play there. And this is some, to me, an important lesson that comes out of the twin balance sheet crisis and the analysis that follows. In the final analysis, I think it really turns the spotlight on microprudential tools and their role in running or regulating the macroeconomic system. Now, all of you, of course, look forward to the annual monetary policy announcements of the Monetary Policy Committee and so on. But the Reserve Bank silently plays a very deep role also by making small adjustments to things like loan to value ratios, by adjusting risk weights on lending to MSMEs, unsecured consumer credit, all of which reduce financial fragility. Just to give you an example, the loan to value ratio on loans less than 2.5 lakhs, gold loans less than 2.5 lakhs, has been increased by 10 percentage points starting April 2026 from 75% to 85%. Right? So you can now borrow 85% of the gold value, where earlier you could just borrow 75% of it. Right? Risk weights on lending to MSMEs had been raised sharply in 2023. They have come down, right? So these calibrations, I think, are now the way forward. And as economic students, it's not just enough to study the RBI's interest policy moves, but it's also important to look into some of these little details. And ultimately, I think our RBI has really done a great job. It's insulated the economy against the financial crisis, and it's strict supervision because there's a lot of external pressure also on India to go in for capital account liberalization, capital account. Complete liberalization of the capital account, which we still haven't done. And the RBI has withstood those pressures in an admirable way, and it plays a very important role in keeping the financial system well regulated. So something like dismantling of the Glass-Steagall framework, which lasted for 66 years, nothing of that sort is happening in India, and I think we should be pretty happy about it. Right, so thank you very much. With that, I've come to an end. So if you have any questions.
So thank you, Ananya, for this comprehensive presentation on that. And what we can say, for an economy to succeed, most important factor is the trust. We have to maintain the trust. And financial sector, that's why we don't want it should fail, either from bank's perspective or government perspective, because it's maintain the trust. And also we need to understand that once a problem plugs in the system, to correct it, it takes too long. As in the last slides, you have seen that. It is the large firms, large industries, which drives the economy. And there the credit growth has almost, you can say, comes very, very low. It's slowed down to that. And still you can see that even this government is so much money they are putting in this public sector investments. Even then this private investment is not picking up, and as a result this growth uncertainty is continuing in that. Okay, so now we can invite some questions. Yes, any questions or comments, anyone? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dastidar, for a super interesting presentation. This is not a topic I know a great deal about, but I did notice something. The Reserve Bank revised the prompt corrective action guidelines in 2017-18, which interestingly is the exact year when the NPA percentage hits its peak and begins to go down. So I was wondering, one, if perhaps the PCA action had something to do with resolving the main problem that you spoke about, the twin balance sheet problem. And secondly, the PCA had two sort of contrasting factors. One is that, of course, it helped reduce NPAs, especially for for banks, but also there's some upcoming research that says that it possibly had negative effects for NBFCs' access to credit from formal banks in particular, while that's a small share. Those are my two questions.
Hi, Professor. My name is Adya Bakshi. I think you really broke everything down into really simple ways for us to understand. It was really interesting to hear all of that. If one were to draw a sort of pro and con list for the full liberalization of the capital account, what might that entail? I just had a doubt about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the really very super interesting lecture. So the rise of MSME sector in terms of their share, and if I can say the fall of the real estate infrastructure sector, which is represented by the bigger banks, bigger holders of finance. So how do you see this trend? Is it something which is more encouraging? Because although the MSMEs, their ratios could be less than 1, but they are still paying off their debts. And so the sector is no more dependent upon the one or two few huge parties, but more of decentralized smaller MSMEs. So it will take all of them to fail, and then will have a large impact. So how do you see that?
It was a super excellent presentation, very crystal clear. My question is that, we know that investment capex and investment in general peaked in around 2007-8. 2006 to 2009 is what we consider as a bliss period as far as growth, investment, exports are concerned. You also brought it out very nicely. Now, but we also know that some of the assets, credits that were issued that appeared as NPA later on were actually pertaining to this period, right? So even though technically they, in terms of bank books, they showed up later, but they related to this particular period. So this also suggests then that some of those credits and that investments that appeared as investments were actually not productive investment, didn't play significant role. I mean, their contribution to growth was not what was expected because they turned out to be NPAs. So do you know if anybody has accounted for this? So when we struggle today that, our investment capex, private capex especially, is significantly below what it had become in 2007-8. Perhaps some correction is called for in that understanding. Would you have some sense of how those numbers, corrected numbers, will look like?
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, your question, I think you're right. The RBI's, it could have been a response because the RBI has been extremely what should I say, responsive to the situation and been taking steps, appropriate steps to change balance sheets around. So apart from that, I really don't have a specific measure that they took or something. But I think you anticipate quite correctly what had happened. Regarding full capital account liberalization, now that's actually a very the dangers of full capital account liberalization is something that you understand very well if you look at the literature that came up in context of the East Asian crisis. So Thailand, for instance, the country where it all started, had opted for capital account liberalization. And one of the institutions that got a lot of flack for the kind of advice that it dishes around was the IMF, because the IMF walked into Thailand and had its usual sort of set of prescriptions, and they actually turned what was a financial crisis into a very, very real one, with their demand compressing and fiscal deficit cutting kind of prescriptions. Now, the reason I mentioned the IMF, this whole doctrine that you should have capital account liberalization and that unfettered flow of capital, sort of unfettered capital flows, etc. Now, it goes with a certain financial architecture. The architecture which came up during the Bretton Woods was established with fixed exchange rates till the 70s, and only, that architecture was fully in place when the now developed economies, opted for a sort of hands-off approach to their capital flows. Now, to apply that same logic to emerging markets does not really seem appropriate without a study of how this can affect, among other things, our exchange rates, our foreign exchange positions. And we also want to retain setting our own interest rates, right? That freedom, which is also something that you give up once you, to a large extent, once you go in for and allow for the effects of capital flows to affect your interest rates, your exchange rates. So I think it's still a risky option, and the RBI has taken an excellent position on it. Yes, I think it's encouraging that banks are lending to MSMEs, because they really have no other go-to place, and it's a good sign that there is a lot of growth of MSME investments. But if you look at the most burning problem in India today, I would still say it is, reaping a demographic dividend, it's employment. Now, true, the MSMEs are also very, very employment intensive. But the question of large-scale employment does not go away till you have large-scale industrialization, which is why, after the 60s, the industrialization debate is back in fashion now. We're all talking about industrialization and ways to make it happen. And one of the places it gets reflected in is the bank, is the bank credit story. So I think that's still a very concerning trend, despite, all of the MSME lending being very encouraging. Okay. Now, of course, trust an economist to ask the most difficult question. So, Ram, I don't have a sort of easy answer to your question, but I think.
Do you say my point?
I think I see your point that we over-invested then, and we really looking at correction. In that process now, because you see, the multiplier works both ways. Once you've over-invested in capacity and your capacity utilization rates are continuing to fall, of course that's going to have a staggered effect on investments. Is that kind of what you were trying to say? Right? So, there's this beautiful paper.
Also,
yes.
This, and also that think the investments, credits, assets that turn out to be NPAs.
Right.
Right? They essentially turned out to be unproductive. and therefore not contributing to the growth. So they will have growth implications also.
Yes, yes.
So that was the other point I was trying to make.
I'll just come to that point. But on your first point, the overinvestment side and the downside of the multiplier, basically, there's a beautiful paper by Professor Mihir Rakshit in the ICRA Bulletin. So he has a couple of papers in the ICRA Bulletin on the global financial crisis, and one of them takes up precisely this point. It's called India's Growth Slowdown. So, which, you were asking if there was any recognition in the literature. So I think he sort of really underscores, as he looks at the growth slowdown as being rooted in that overinvestment that took place in 7 to 8. Now, I don't think it's unproductive investment, because a lot of it was in the infrastructure sector. And it did not pay out, but a lot of these were in public-private partnerships. So the government also bore a part of the losses, and that is something that is cushioned. So, you see, one of the reasons the twin balance sheet was a quiet crisis was the fact that India was facing a supply bottleneck, which this infrastructure constraint actually alleviated. So part of the growth that continued was because this infrastructure had been put in place, even though the infrastructure firms were in the red. So even though user charges were not being set, and those who had built the roads, firms that built the roads, were making deep losses, but the roads were there, and that enabled mobility. So I would not say it was entirely, unproductive from the macroeconomic sense. Right.
Okay, Ananya. So any other question or no? Okay, so thank you so much, Ananya, for this wonderful talk and addressing all these concerns. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Ananya Ghosh for this insightful talk. Now, may I request Professor Surender Kumar to felicitate our guest as a small token of appreciation on behalf of YSS Organizing Committee. In the meantime, I may invite YSS Organizing Committee members, Professor Ram Singh, Barun, Manish, Rohit, and also Professor Paramjit and Professor Subhas on the dais for a group photo. And also group, Deepak, please. Professor Subhas, please. With this, we can conclude this session. Now, please join us for the tea at DAC lawn, and please rejoin us at 12 p.m. for our parallel sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Not here. Our parallel sessions are computer lab and PhD lab, and also room number 205. Please proceed to your respective rooms. The participants are requested, please proceed to their respective rooms at least 5 minutes prior to the session starts. Thank you so much.